Hi there, and welcome to Rise Like Lions. I'm Kevin.
I'm Dave.
Great to see you folks, and glad you could join us for the third in our Rise Like Lions elections special series. And so what we did in our first episode is we looked at 10 big issues from our perspective, anyway, that we thought were coming up in terms of the federal election that is happening September 20th. So it's getting close. And the issues we looked at were the environment, the economy, inequality, affordable housing, health, education, and public services, tax reform, First Nations and truth and reconciliation, police reform, electoral reform, and foreign policy. So those were the issues we thought were important. And last episode, we looked at the Conservative Party of Canada. We looked at their platform in relation to those important issues. And we pretty much came to the conclusion that if you're a big fan of the status quo, folks, if you're a big fan of keep the industrial machine rolling, keep the greenhouse gases pumping, keep the capitalism and the money making coming, they're your party, Conservative Party of Canada.
And if you ever believe a conservative, have at it.
Exactly.
Have at it.
I got some swamp
Some of
land
us
to
have
sell
lived
ya.
too long to believe that, but sure.
Yeah,
Go for it.
Exactly. So yeah, it was interesting. You know, we talked about a bit of a change in branding, but really kind of the same old, same old. So today we're going to pivot to a much different beast. This is the second of Canada's historic parties of the elite. And so we are talking, of course, about the Liberal Party of Canada. There is the ever charming Justin Trudeau. And what's interesting, Dave, is you see Justin Trudeau all throughout their platform. So he clearly is, or they perceive him to be an
Because the
asset.
Liberals don't do identity politics at all.
No, they don't. They
And a pretty face doesn't mean anything to
No,
them.
not one bit. And so what we're going to do, folks, is same as last time, just going to go through the platform. We're going to look at what the Liberals are saying vis-a-vis the issues that we think are important. And so to start out, it is quite interesting to see the similarities and the differences in terms of what the two parties are up to. So first of all, the Liberals talk a lot in their platform about, of course, they're the incumbent party, right? So they talk about what we have done. And this is where the Liberal Party has, I think most people would argue, an advantage in that, although in ways they screwed up the response to COVID, in other ways, they appeared fairly competent. You know, we've got to be real. We're the most vaccinated country on earth. There are things that happened in terms of, you know, the CERB that supported people who are out of work, you know, small business supports and whatnot. Some of those things were well played, Liberals. You kind of have to give them that. And so that is present in all aspects of the report. Every section really starts out with a bit of a list of like all the great and awesome things that they have done. However, when you get down to the nitty gritty, there's some interesting things. I'll start with some points of contrast with the Conservative Party, because the big takeaway, folks, from last episode was that the Conservatives are really, it's a pretty standard neoliberal approach to governance. And again, by neoliberal, we're talking about an approach which is sort of like let the market rip, let it do its thing, and sort of tinker around the edges and sort of try and ameliorate its worst excesses. Here's a little stuff for you poor people. Here's a couple little environmental regulations, but really it's like keep that free market engine churning. The Liberals we're going to see, they certainly have the same core in their approach, but it's a different flavor of neoliberalism. It really is neoliberalism with a smile. And, you know, what a smile right now, right? In terms of their leader and their cash. So they're putting all their chips on this guy and his sort of presence to come through for them. But I also want to be real too, folks. Even though the core of the Liberal program is neoliberal, there are some really important differences between them and the Conservatives. And that's what makes the Liberals such a tricky political force, because a lot of the difference they bring to the table is cosmetic when you compare them to the Conservatives, but not all of it is. So let's be real about this. Let's break down the parts that are actually really different. And I'll start with one thing too, which is some of the bigger issues. And one of the big issues that's been playing out in Canada recently is the issue of childcare, how unaffordable childcare is. And so if you look across the country, in Ontario, for instance, I think the average monthly childcare cost is about $1,700 a month. So you think about that. If you're like a low-income family, the cost benefit of someone actually going to work to get a second income you have to really crunch the numbers on that if you're going to pay $1,700 out of pocket just on childcare. So the Conservatives had a proposal around childcare, which of course is about tax credits, right? It's not bad in the sense that, for instance, that $1,700 a month, it would bring it down to about $420 a month. That's a big drop. However, the Liberals have gone a step further, and this is, I think the kind of childcare plan that a lot of people, even a lot of lefties, are advocating for. They're promising $10 a day childcare. So if you think again about that low-income family, they're paying $1,700 now. Under the Conservatives, they'd end up paying about $420, $430. Under a $10 a day plan, they're paying about $200 a month. That's good. So that's a legitimate thing that you've got to give the Liberals credit for, I think, in terms of their platform. There's always a big question, and this is something that, Dave, when we talk about the Liberal Party of Canada, the big question is always some awesome promises, but will they actually do them?
It's hit and miss. It really is hit and miss. Yeah, they get a majority. No, they simply will not do them.
Yeah.
We've seen that in the past too many times. But if they think it's a chance that'll get them another majority, that it can be played all the way through, they'll do it. It's pretty crass. It's genuinely a straight up playbook, and they are very wise, Yeah,
they're savvy.
I will take Liberals over Conservatives anytime. At least something doesn't deteriorate to completely like to 17th century. That's nice,
Yeah. Yeah,
but,
it's a good point, eh? And there is a difference at the end of the day between naked neoliberalism and we talked about the neoliberalism with a smile that the Liberals bring. So yeah, will they do it? Hard to say. If they did bring in $10 a day childcare, let's be real, folks, that's going to help a lot of families out. That's going to help a lot of women go to work who otherwise wouldn't be able to. So let's give them some props for that. In a lot of other areas too. They talk about things the Conservatives simply don't talk about. So for instance, the Liberals talk about the high cost of education today. And they talk specifically about, canceling all interest on federal student loans. So the loan would no longer bear interest. It would literally just be paying back the principal. That's big for students. It's not quite as far as when we talked about education. We talked about free public post-secondary education. That's not where they're going to go, but interest-free loans is a tangible benefit. They also talk about increasing the grant available for post-secondary students from $3,000 to $6,000 over 2 years. So 2 years of relatively minor grants, but still, this is what the Liberals will do. They'll give you tangible little pieces in these different areas that, while they don't go, I think we would argue, far enough, they are real benefits, as opposed to what I said before with Conservatives and a lot of their tax breaks, kind of bullshit benefits. So lots of interesting things come forward there. You see the same thing in terms of healthcare. When you read the Conservative proposals on healthcare, the Conservative Party of Canada, they talk about a mental health strategy. Well, the Liberals talk about a mental health strategy too. Interesting point of comparison. In the Conservative mental health strategy, what they are saying is that we're not going to increase the money we give to the provinces. We're simply going to ask the provinces to earmark a portion of what they already get for mental health. So that's kind of like, okay, you're given the same amount of money. You just want them to divide the pie up slightly differently and put a label on it. That's your mental health strategy. Whereas the Liberals' mental health strategy involves billions of dollars in new funding. And also it involves just core investments in the public healthcare system, just to decrease wait times, to hire more nurses, to hire more doctors, to the tune of $6 billion. And so again, this is one of the differences between the Conservatives and the Liberals. Does it go far enough? I think a lot of people would argue, no, it doesn't. And yet they are, some tangible improvements. But there are areas in which the platforms are actually kind of quite similar, and housing is one of them. Although we're going to see, again, not entirely similar. But the Liberals, they talk about building 1.4 million units of new housing. But again, it's very clear, it's just housing. So it's not necessarily affordable. Instead, what they say is, oh, we're going to build $250,000 homes per year over 4 years. But then they also lump in the amount of homes that are already built right now without their help at all. That's where they come to their 1.4 million. So there's a little bit of screwing around in those numbers. But again, those are not 1.4 million affordable homes. They're not. Having said that, the Liberals do have a national housing strategy. And again, that's what separates them from the Conservatives. Once more, the Liberals did actually realize there needed to be such a thing as a national housing strategy, i.e., we need to figure out people's access to homes as a nation. We need to look at it and we need to ensure that it's working for all of us. Of course, the Liberal plan, is it sufficient to create affordable housing? No, it isn't. But there was some investment in affordable housing under the previous government, and they're talking about doing it again. But again, there's a little smoke and mirrors there, folks, around housing. This 1.4 million, that's not affordable units, So just wanted to throw that out there. But when you look at differences too in terms of the Liberal approach to the economy, so the Conservatives talk about, they did talk about some interesting things in terms of labor, the Conservative Party. For instance, mandating that large corporations have union representation on boards of directors. That was an interesting move for the Conservatives. The Liberals, though, go one step further, and they're actually talking about passing anti-scab legislation. This is a much more substantial thing that, labor movements have been looking for a few years. Again, this, Dave, I got to be real. For me, this could be one of those promises that sounds awesome, but does it actually happen?
Yeah.
I'll be skeptical, man, if it does.
Sounds to me like completely counter to everything that you would believe in if you're a conservative, right? Like
Yeah.
It really does. Progressive conservative, which they're trying to look like again.
Yeah.
Maybe there was a time. No, I don't remember a time for that either.
No.
I think, no.
Maybe Joe Clark. Joe Clark might have gone there.
Yeah, and what chance did he get?
Yeah. Not, he got crushed by Trudeau.
Yeah,
Senior,
you're out of here, buddy. You're an actual progressive conservative. Ooh,
Yeah,
no, not going to do that. Yeah. It's funny you're bringing up a few of these things. I was thinking, how much time is lost by the fact that Liberals can leverage themselves against conservatives? We got rid of that whole Conservative Party twice over, and they got a chance to reinvent themselves because Liberals give them space to do it.
Definitely.
Because it's very convenient for them.
Definitely.
Under the Liberals, there was a pledge made for education that long ago we were supposed to have, where just as it went with the early primary years, just as it later went with high school, it was supposed to go with secondary public education. It was supposed to long ago have been included in education. Other countries like Germany and a few others, they kept their pledge.
Yeah.
Because the dynamic didn't sway and continuously move back right all the time. It's very handy for the Liberals. And healthcare was another one. Yeah. It was initially to cover these basics with us, our GP and whatever, right, in hospitals. And then it was supposed to, bit by bit, expand further and further until your head, till it was head to toe and pharmaceutical and all the rest. It kind of stopped, and then little fits and spurts the Liberals get to do, and they look amazing. Yeah. Because conservatives simply try to take it back all the time. Whatever they say during election time, they take it back.
You're right, and I think that's an important point. Is those two parties tend to work synergistically.
Very much.
They really do, in terms of the interests of the ruling class, right? The people with money.
Yeah.
And that tacking back and forth between the sort of the naked neoliberal meanies, which the conservatives have tended to play that role, versus the smiley happy neoliberals. Yeah. The liberals, they will incrementally improve things, but they'll never fully go back on the damage that the conservatives, or even there's been some, let's be real, there's been some very right-wing liberal governments too. You think of like Paul Martin and what he was doing and that sort of thing, and even under Chrétien, what Martin was doing as finance minister was horrible stuff. But it keeps sliding back. It slides back less with the liberals. So interesting stuff there. So let's keep moving forward. But again, another point of real contradiction with the conservatives. The liberals are actually embracing this idea of 10 paid sick days too, across the board. That's real. That's good. That's something that the Conservatives are not talking about in their plan. Um, but again, because they're liberals, there's no increase in the basic sort of entitlements around employment insurance, for instance. So they're not talking about an increase. It's still the ridiculous 55%, and so that's a big issue around the economy. They're actually, that's where I'd say the two programs are closest between the Liberals and Conservatives. One of the big differences in their platforms, though, is the Liberals, in every single section of their platform, they have what they call a diversity and inclusion sort of summary, where they have filtered that through their entire program, where they're going to look at issues of diversity and inclusion. And so, folks, the cynical amongst us might say, oh, that's just kind of lip service, that's woke neoliberalism. And yet, for certain groups, that's real, right? If you're an equity-seeking group in Canada, if you're an LGBTQ person, if you're a Black Canadian, if you're a recent immigrant, a racialized minority, you name it, this is something that is tangible for the Liberals that they offer. They really do talk about diversity and inclusion. A couple examples. For instance, they have an LGBTQ strategy as part of their platform. It says it's going to outright ban conversion therapy. It's interesting, that they would take that sort of strong of a stance. I think that's a great idea, to ban conversion therapy. They also specifically have increased funding for women's shelters to combat, domestic violence. They talk about supporting, female academics. They also talk about supporting Black academics, Black artists, right? So there are ways in which I think the diversity program of the Liberals is real, and it's going to attract certain people. And again, this is really part of their approach, where it is this kind of, kinder, gentler, yet still neoliberal approach. You also really see on truth and reconciliation a big difference. So truth and reconciliation is a big section in the Liberal platform. You can tell it's been thought through. It directly addresses the issue of residential schools. It talks about the need to, continue the process of repatriation and seeking justice for those who died. It talks about self-determination and self-government and land claims, and all of these things are in there. Very, very different from the conservative approach. And yet again, Dave, this is one of those, I hate to keep coming back to this, but to me, this is one of those instances where we've seen this from the Liberals before. We've seen good language on truth and reconciliation. And yet my sense from a lot of the Native community that I'm in touch with is that the reality has not matched the rhetoric.
No, it hasn't. I think it goes without being said. They've had power a lot. They've had, in Canada, a prime minister's practically an emperor if they have a majority. So if he wanted to take care of all that, it would have been taken care of. Yeah. That's where conservatives are a bit more honest. They're not going to go there, so they don't go there. Yeah. So they don't have to, lie maybe is a strong word, but not really intend to prioritize it.
Yeah,
right.
You're right. Where the Liberals are masters at signaling these things, and sometimes even following through, or sometimes partially following through or whatnot.
Of course, it's partial. It's very selective.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, get it done, and then it can just be managed after that. But no, you can build an oil pipeline before you can build a little tiny water system for somebody who's got contaminated water at all times.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you mentioned.
That's not sincere.
It isn't. I'm so glad you mentioned the oil pipeline, Dave, because we're going to segue into the Liberal approach to the environment, and this is where again you're going to see some differences between the Conservatives and the Liberals, but also some depressing similarities. So, what are the differences? Well, again, the Liberals are very clear about, the country needing to meet its climate change objectives. They're very clear about the importance of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. But then again, there's a lot of BS going on, because they even say on their policy document, they say, well, greenhouse gas emissions from our oil and gas sector have increased 20% since 2005. Having said that, we're still going to move to net zero from our carbon intensive oil and gas industry by 2050. Net zero from the oil and gas industry. It's It doesn't make any flipping sense, folks. You can't have a net zero oil and gas industry, but it's right there in the Liberal Party platform with no details as to how that's going to happen. And yet, again, this is one of those cases of rhetoric versus reality, Dave, because what did Trudeau do famously? He buys a flipping pipeline just to keep the tar sands going.
He does, but he said that that's the best way to fund getting to zero emissions. So, he said it.
Yeah.
Words are magic, right?
Yeah. With logic like that, it's really interesting. Yeah. How do you get to net zero? By pumping tar sands, GHGs, into the air.
I don't know. I hate to sound so cynical about it, but the truth is, it's bald-faced insincere. It just is.
It really is.
Yeah, and then that helps to get this is the whole cycle again. It helps to get the conservative votes because certain people, certain generations, whatever, certain class levels, they just say, oh, that's it. He's so disingenuous. He's so insincere. Who else is there? Oh, look at that. Oh, the blue and white is much softer than the stark blue. Let's give them a shot. Give them a shot. They've had tons of time in too.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I know, but between
I don't want to sound partisan, so I'm leaving out the other part of that. But it's a cynical thing between the two of them, and the Liberals play it like a fiddle, man.
They really do. And throughout this, and I'm so glad you wore your orange shirt, because we're going to see this, folks, when we deal with the NDP
I just
platform.
love orange.
Yeah,
I swear.
But the Liberal playbook, as you put it, Dave, which is a good way of putting it, because it really is a tried and true strategy of the Liberals, is all these things we're talking about where we have to, because again, I want to be real, folks. I don't want to just trash an entire party's platform without having read
Certainly
it.
not trashing the average person who votes Liberal.
For sure, but also because the things that we're agreeing, we're like, that's pretty good. They're taken from the NDP. It's what they always
100% only.
Always.
Just 100%.
Yeah.
Just all, which since the NDP would do it universally, it would actually get the result. That's what they forget. Conservatives say, oh, they're all about finances. Well, universal means a lot less effort to manage it, a lot less resources used on it, and the result is thorough and complete. Yeah. And same with Liberals, just going around the edges, doing a little bit here and there, only once there's pressure. When you just get it the hell done, pardon my,
Yeah.
When you just do it, you get those benefits, like something that all of them being supposedly capitalists seem like pretty bad ones, because there is an advantage to doing something absolute.
Yeah.
Like if you have a monopoly on something, there's a real advantage in it, and government gives you a chance to have monopolies on some things that have to be for everyone anyway. So you do it universally. It costs less per person, like our healthcare compared to the US, at best half as expensive.
Yeah.
And then they say, well, sometimes theirs is better. Yeah, great.
If you're a millionaire,
25% of people can get none. Most of the rest basically can't, because they have such high costs up top for their insurance, and they have nothing extra to spend on it. And that would apply to each thing. If it's public, it should be universal. But anyway, I sound partisan again. I don't want to do that, because I'm not really dissing, conservative voters or liberal voters. I think it's well thought out. I think they're not given complete
not the voters. I'm going to diss the hell out of the parties, but not the voters, maybe.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
For sure.
Let's do that.
Yeah. let's be real here. But having said that, that's why we have to give some props to the Liberals, because they have cribbed part of policy platforms that we actually think are good policy platforms.
Yeah.
And that's part of what makes them such a challenging force. And like I said, we're going to see that. Yeah, it's very, very clever. We're going to see that when we look at the NDP platform and break it down for y'all. But just to finish up, folks, because we want to keep these segments a little bit contained, because we could, when you really get into the weeds on the platforms, you could really get into the weeds. But the last thing I want to talk about the Liberals, and this is where I think the similarities between liberals and conservatives are literally non-existent. And this is when it comes to foreign policy. And this might confuse people, because a lot of people, and myself included, when I think of the worst Canadian foreign policies, I do think of the Stephen Harper government. I think of getting involved and Afghanistan, and this sort of full-throated support for the US-led war on terror, and this sort of increased militarization, increasing military spending. Well, I've got to be clear, and this is something I really only found out. I had an inkling of it, but I really only found out the numbers when I attended this talk by the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute. And that is that Justin Trudeau's government has increased military spending more than the Harper government did. He has doubled down on our relationship with NATO more even than the Harper. I mean, Harper got us out of Afghanistan. Let's be real. I mean, that process started and was committed to, when Harper was still in power. So this is something where it is really, truly depressing how there is very little difference between the two parties who tend to swap power back and forth between them in Canada. Chomsky in the United States talks about a bipartisan consensus between Democrats and Republicans vis-a-vis American imperialism. So the idea is that it doesn't matter if you're Democrat or Republican, you can fiercely disagree on domestic issues, but when it comes to the international issues and the right to assert U.S. hegemony over all the other states, you're on the same page, right? And it seems to be the same in terms of Canada. And I just, one thing that was really, I found absurd to the point of hilarity was the Trudeau government says, well, we're going to create a Canadian Center for Peace, Order, and Good Government to help countries around the world. Which is so funny. And there's all this talk in there about like protecting human rights while we sell $25 billion worth of armored personnel carriers to the Saudi government to help them destroy the country of Yemen. While Trudeau, actually, Chrystia Freeland bragged a while ago about having a feminist foreign policy.
Oh, like her grandfather? Oh, I guess I shouldn't go there.
Yeah, well, let's go there, right? Interesting connections.
Coincidental. Her sense of foreign affairs seems to be similar to her grandfather.
Yeah.
But we all pretend that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, we'll overlook those fascistic elements.
Yeah.
And free trade as well. So, what does a liberal foreign policy look like?
About it.
It looks like, exactly. It looks like more free trade, which is really just international neoliberalism, right? It's predatory capitalism on a global scale. It is more NATO missions. It is more adherence to the U.S. and more. I think what's really, and this is, Dave, where the liberal playbook is. It's savvy, but in ways it's even more insidious, and you could even make the argument more evil than the conservatives, because the liberals will do this thing of creating. They actually have the gall. They'll create their Canadian Center for Peace, Order, and Good Government. And yet, really, what that organization will do, like the Lima Group did, is put a fig leaf over the worst examples of imperialism and horrible international relations and human rights violations. And Canada, it's almost like Canada knows its role in empire. We are the fig leaf. We are the smiley, happy, woke imperialist cover for this stuff. And it's nauseating,
It's really sad.
It really is. And so, at the end of the day, folks, again, in the interest of not going on too long, because we could with any of these segments in terms of looking at political party platforms, they're deep documents. There's a lot in them, and I would encourage people to go to the websites of the parties and see what it is you think yourself.
And ask your candidates some questions.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Sherry mentioned today, we've both gotten texts from all of the major parties anyway, from the three major ones, right? And then the last that I got one from, after probably receiving 2 to 3 from each of the others, and no responses back, she commented the same thing, saying, I ask each questions. That's part of my decision making. And neither conservative or liberals, that in this particular case in our riding, got back at all. Even after Senate, it's like they've reached out to ask, hey, you voting for us, or what? Or is it a maybe?
Yeah.
And then she asked, well, I just want to clarify a couple of things. I don't want to read 10,000 documents and stuff. Can you just tell me what you think about this, what you feel about that? What would you do about this? Would you vote according to party lines if the conservatives were doing this, if the liberals were doing that? Because I do not favor that, or I really favor this. Nothing. Just nothing. They wanted to know yes, no, maybe what.
Yeah.
And that's it. The NDP was the only one that responded back.
I've kind of had that same experience.
And
we're
I
not
wish
making this
that
up.
mattered.
We're not
But
making this up.
the Liberals will probably then take the statistics about they're responding and say it's theirs. I'm being terrible about that. That's all.
Yeah.
But
it is true. Good
seems
point.
like
Good
it.
point, Dave. Yeah.
Yeah.
Get in touch with your candidates too, your local
Yes.
candidates.
Get in touch with them.
Attend if you're able to debates. I mean, most of them are going to be virtual, I imagine, right? But, get involved that way too and ask questions
Yeah.
from your candidates. And maybe some of the things we've covered might give you some questions to ask, right? About
Yeah,
various
it's a
aspects.
democracy. They should be responsive.
Very much
where
so.
Canada's literally supposed to have responsible government. I think part of that would be being responsive. So get
Yeah.
them responsive. Let
Definitely.
them be that way. If they can't handle it while they're running,
Yeah.
what are they going to do once they're in?
Yeah, that's a really, really good point, right? When they need your vote, if they don't really care to dialogue with you, what about when they no longer
Yeah,
need
they
your
can't.
vote,
If they
right?
can't even fake it in the meantime,
Yeah, yeah.
they're definitely not doing it afterwards.
Totally. And on that important note, we'll leave off this episode, folks, and please join us for the next one where we talk about the New Democratic Party and their platform, and we'll see some of those wonderful things that the Liberals have been able to swipe and see what the NDP offers. And also, again, we're going to be real, we're going to be critical. It's not all roses, but definitely a bit of a different vision for the country. So thanks for joining us, folks, and hopefully we'll see you next episode. If you like what you saw, please consider liking the video, subscribing to our channel, sharing the video to your friends if you really like it, and we'd appreciate all of that. Thanks.
Thank you.